Welcome back to the Sunrise Road podcast. This is the first episode of our new season, our podcast where we have conversations that connect and weave hope into the fabric of our shared lives. So we're excited to be back on here, Melody, right?
We are excited, and I want to share just a couple of things that are different about this season. One is that you may notice that we're live on a number of platforms, and I'm not going to go through them all because if you're here with us live, you know it. But the exciting thing is that you can chat with us. So if you have any questions about what's happening, if you have any questions for our guests, we would love to be able to interact with you in that way. So use that chat function. And if you want to let us know that you're here, that's great. And if you're listening later on a podcast platform or on Facebook or YouTube, welcome. We're excited for this third season. And we want to share a little bit about what's going on with this third season and why we're doing it.
That's right. Our third season, we are having guests again. This is the same again as in previous seasons, but this season we want to talk a little bit with guests we are working with and mission and ministry partners in our community and around the world. And we are very excited to have two guests again today.
We are. Many of you may know and have heard me speak often about my passion for an organization called Justice in Action. It's something that caught my attention from the very beginning of its efforts here in our community. And I was super excited when I was honored enough to be a part of the hiring process for two organizers for this fabulous organization. And so I have known Beth Graverholt and Olivia Butts for just about as long as anybody with Justice in Action, and I'm super excited that they are with us as lead. Beth is our lead organizer, and Olivia is our associate organizer. And I think everybody should have organizers in their lives because the work that you all do is so amazing. And it really connects with a passion point for me, which is justice. And until I was involved with Justice in Action, I don't think I really understood why justice was different than mercy work. And so just to begin, would love to ask you to share a little bit about Justice in Action and what is different about Justice in Action as mission and outreach work.
Yeah, I can jump in, and Olivia, feel free to hop in if I miss something. So Justice in Action is a coalition of right now 26 faith communities and growing in Lancaster County, Nebraska. So that includes the city of Lincoln and the surrounding area. And we are working together to build the power of organized people for justice. And so, to Melody's point, we do differentiate mercy and justice, and that's a point of education that we try to share early on in the process. So, mercy are those things that we're probably used to when we think about the good work or the community outreach or the mission of church, typically. So, mercy is like direct services. Like I think about it as helping one person at a time, like in the food pantry. It's often treating the symptoms of a problem. So we use the food pantry example. You're hungry. We feed you. That's mercy work. But that hunger is a symptom of poverty, of which may be a symptom of not being able to access medical care, which may be a symptom of not being able to access affordable housing or any other number of resources. And justice is the work of, we say, going upstream and figuring out what is that root cause, what is the system that is impacting people's lives negatively, and working to fix the system to address the root cause of that human suffering that we experience in our community. And so that's what we're doing. We begin every fall with a listening process, which we are in right now. And that's where we seek to hear from the community what concerns them. And then we hear those stories, we collect them. Our annual assembly, so people that came to a listening session, they get to vote on what we're going to address. And some years we're adding a new issue. Some years we're just recommitting to the things we're already working on. So this year, we're asking folks to share their stories about how they're impacted by the issues that the Assembly has voted to address in the past couple of years, which include mental health care access, criminal justice reform, namely expanding pretrial diversion, and affordable housing, specifically implementing pre-eviction mediation. So we're seeking to hear from folks how they're affected by those problems. And after listening, we have a research and action process where when we're beginning a new issue, we try to go from this very wide, broad problem area like mental health care to a really narrow and specific problem that's happening here locally in Lincoln and Lancaster County that we can affect change on locally, working with local decision makers who represent us as voters and taxpayers and citizens. Um, so we narrow it down to a really specific problem. This is all, using the work of volunteers from our faith communities. Olivia and I are the only staff, so most of this work is done by volunteer leaders. We narrow a problem, we identify a specific solution that we think can be accomplished locally, and then we organize a great assembly every year. We call it our Nehemiah Assembly. It's inspired by the biblical book of Nehemiah, the story from chapter 5, where he does the same thing. He gathers a great assembly of people and asks the decision makers of his time to implement a change for justice. And that's exactly what we do at our Nehemiah Assembly. We seek to get commitments from decision makers for the solutions that the folks have researched. And it doesn't end there. We follow up with those issues. We follow up on those commitments, and we monitor our issues to make sure that they have the impacts that we intend and that they come to fruition. And so the cycle kind of repeats itself every year. Is there anything you would add, Olivia?
No, I think that's a pretty good overview of how our process works and the importance of the grassroots voice in the entire process through picking our issues and really being the face of the work.
Mm.
Olivia, maybe you can follow up a little bit, because I know that one of the questions that we're getting as we start this listening process for this year, we're not adding a new issue. We know from the board that we're not going to add a new issue because we don't feel that we can effectively address a new issue in ways we want to keep doing what we're doing. But so why would you go to a listening session? What's important about a listening session if we're not hearing new issues? And the question that we ask in Justice in Action is, when you wake up in the middle of the night, what is it that's keeping you awake? And very tongue-in-cheek, it's the bathroom is not the right answer. Like that's not what we're looking for.
Right.
We're looking for, like, what are you worried about when you can't sleep in the middle of the night? What is keeping you awake? If we're not asking that question, what's the importance of a listening session?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and that is something that we've heard a little bit as we embark on our third listening process. So I think something that's really important to mention is that we are doing relational organizing at Justice in Action. We are building relationships with others around shared interest of doing justice work. And although our issues will change, the relationships and the power that we build in Justice in Action will not change. We do house meetings and we come together in small groups to talk about our own personal stories and how our issues affect ourselves and others, to really hear what's going on in people's lives. When we ask people, when you see them maybe after service and you say, "How are you?" and people say, "Good, how are you?" and you say, "Good," right? When you get together in a small group and we ask you to share something personal to you, share about how these issues have affected you or someone you love, that is a relationship building experience. And so we encourage people to go to a listening session, especially in their faith community, to build relationships with others, to understand what's really going on in people's lives. And like Beth mentioned, we are, as Justice in Action this year, we'll be recommitting ourselves to those three issues. And I think it's so important to hear the stories of people and how those issues are affecting your lives. And the listening sessions are really supposed to create that space for people to share how these issues are affecting them or someone they love.
And I would add, so like Pastor Melody said, in past years, we've asked the question, what keeps you up at night worrying? And that's helped us identify new issues. This year, we're asking, how are you affected by the issues we're already working on? And we're asking the question, why? So like Melody said, you know, the why is seems like a simple question, but it's really important, and it's designed to get us all to understand like what are our most deeply held values that motivate us to show up. And literally, if you add the hours that are we have like about 80 team leaders. We have almost 400 network members involved, all volunteers. If you add up all the hours these folks have put in, it's thousands over the last 2 years. So like, why collectively are we putting in thousands of hours of work? And it seems like a simple question, but it's one that is inspiring deeper reflection on what we care about and what unites us as people. And I think in this time in our shared lives, in our community, in our country, in our world, well, these listening sessions are an opportunity to go below the surface and connect on a deeper level, like Olivia said, and to talk about more about what we have in common than what we have than what separates us, what makes us different. To talk about our shared values, our shared why. And even if those whys are different, in these conversations, we see how they connect, right? And that speaks to the interconnectedness of all of us, of the interconnectedness of every injustice, every issue that we're concerned about as people. And so I hope that they'll not only be relationship building this fall, but also really unifying and uplifting in a time in our history that's pretty stressful and divisive.
Mm. I really picked up on that word that you used of the relational organizing, and I realize when I think back of the first encounter with um, Justice in Action, and then in the organizing stage, I was a little apprehensive, and my impression was like, I don't want to be with my little individual story part of a big machine. So the organization in that sense is I don't just want to be a cogwheel, and but you emphasize that, and that's probably the mixture of the Swiss neutrality and the rugged American individualism that I in the meantime adopted. Um, you emphasize that importance of building that connection. What would you say to someone who is on the fence and thinking like, why should I go to one of those listening sessions? I'm not sure I want to sign on to a new thing. I already have so much going on, and I don't want to go to a Tupperware party and go home with the whole
with an orange peeler.
Exactly. Yeah, they're on sale right now, I understand, right?
Yeah, I think, and I'll let Beth kind of jump in after me here, but I think what Beth said really speaks to what we are trying to do. This is a chance to connect in a ever disconnected world, right? We spend a lot of time on social media. We spend time watching TV. And we're really asking people to take a break from social media and take a break from the news and actually sit down with people who live in your city or your, county and talk about something that matters. We really like to think of listening sessions as something they're countercultural. They're different, right? You're taking an hour or 2 hours out of your day to spend time talking with other people around, at a church, at a dinner table, in a living room, at a coffee shop, to talk about things that matter. And that does not happen often. So I would say if you're on the fence, just give it a shot, right? 2 hours out of your day to connect with someone who maybe you know and maybe you don't know, or someone you think you know, but you might learn something new about them. So I would say give it a chance. And in a world where we're ever more disconnected, connecting with someone, in my opinion, can only really have a positive impact.
And I would add that just attending a listening session and sharing your story does not mean that you're making any commitment beyond that. At the end of listening sessions, the invitation is made for a continued commitment. but you can say no. We prepare, we train our group leaders that lead those sessions that some people are going to say no, and that's okay. But it is important to us as justice in action that we do more than just talk about our community's problems, that we offer people a next step to get involved by helping with our research and issue work, or simply, showing up and casting their vote for the issues that we'll work on or continue working on, showing up to show their support for issues that matter to them and to our community. And so it's an opportunity. And I would just, like Olivia said, I told somebody yesterday, just come and see, just encourage, come and see, and then you can decide what to do next. These listening sessions are really invitational.
I want to talk a little bit about the other sometimes stumbling block that I encounter out in the community, because it seems like some of the things that we're picking up that over the last few years we have learned this is what's keeping us as a community up at night. They appear to be controversial. And so one of the things that I want to do is give you all a chance to talk about those issues. But I also want to say that these are issues because this is an interfaith network. It's a spiritual network, and these are all spiritual communities. They're not necessarily all Christian communities or mainline communities. And so if anybody is out there listening and thinking, gosh, why isn't my faith community a part of that? Contact Beth and Olivia, because we would love to grow this network. And I think that one of the things that we found that's been important for me based on the listening sessions is that I'm now able to have conversations with people in my community and say, because before it was always like, I hear this story and I hear this story. And as the pastor, when I'm preparing on a Sunday morning, I know what I'm preparing for because people have shared their stories with me, but they're not sharing them with each other. They show up and they say, I'm fine. Well, as a people, we're not actually okay. There are things keeping us up at night, and those things we found very powerfully are universal. So what have we found are the things that are keeping us up at night? How are we following up on those? Where are we now with these three issues that we have been working on?
Yeah, so I can speak to a couple of them. One of the first issues that we identified when we held our very first listening sessions 2 years ago now, and asked people what keeps you up at night, we heard so many stories about people being unable to get the mental health care that they needed. We heard about long wait lists to get into providers. We heard about people going to the emergency room and sitting there for hours and never getting the mental health treatment that they were there for. We heard about them being turned away from treatment because they didn't meet this very narrow set of qualifications. We heard about parents having to call the police on their own children who were in the midst of a mental health crisis, and just an immense amount of suffering around that issue specifically. And that was our launching point for addressing that issue, right? So we took those stories and we said, okay, how can we learn more about how the police are getting involved in mental health cases? How can we learn more about what the backlog really is for a lot of our mental health providers? How can we learn more about what's going on in our ERs? And so we set up interviews with all of those stakeholders. We interviewed the Lincoln Police Department. We interviewed mobile crisis response teams that are sometimes responding with or after police officers to crises. We interviewed folks in our hospital system and providers, and we asked them, like, what's going on? What are you seeing? How are you experiencing this? Even as we continue to talk to people on, the grassroots level being affected by the problems. And what we gleaned in that mental health research process in our first year was that there's lots of resources. We've interviewed over 30 different community resources at this point. But the trouble seemed to be that people don't know how to access them. Sometimes one provider doesn't even know what the other provider is doing and how to refer a patient there if they need to. So we identified, we called this, it's a maze of services is how we described it, a maze of mental health services that's really confusing and challenging to navigate. And with that being the problem we identified, then we looked into, well, what are other communities doing to address this problem? And we learned that some communities are doing something called mental health navigation. And so it's a public system that anyone can access. It's one number to call, one entry point when you're not in crisis, when you just know that you need help. You can call, or you can access it online, and there's a vetted list of mental health resources, and not just providers, but support groups, anonymous groups, other things like that. And there's a vetted list that's made by trained navigators that are deeply connected with relationships in the community and know what provider does what group serves which purpose, who takes which insurance, who has openings. So they're professionals that are keeping all of that information up to date, keeping abreast of it, and they can direct people to the right resource. So instead of getting a list of 30 providers and just with their names and numbers and say, here, call this and try finding help, which is really overwhelming. We've heard from people, especially when you're in the midst of a mental health struggle. That navigator or that navigation platform can help you maybe get to a list of 3 and to know what exactly those 3 do, what insurance they take if that's part of it. And that's a much easier list to call and to get help. People are able to get help faster in other communities with these mental health navigation systems. And so where we are now, we convened a mental health navigation working group this summer with about 6 different community agencies and providers, including our local behavioral health authority, Lutheran Family Services, the New Americans Task Force, Brave Bee, which is the Child Advocacy Center, the United Way, the Lancaster Connected Initiative, private providers, and our Justice in Action folks that have been impacted by these problems personally, rather than on a professional level. They're personally impacted. And all of these folks are at the table, and we're drafting a proposal for what could this navigation system look like in our community, that we hope, when we're done with it, we'll go out for funding. And to be clear, we're not a direct service provider as Justice in Action, so we won't be running the navigation system. But one of the great resources and professionals in our community or a public agency could take this managing this system on and really help stringing some of these disconnected services together and getting people the help they need sooner. So that's where mental health navigation.
Really exciting, because this is like really, it feels like we're getting somewhere there in that issue. I want to hear from Olivia, and I want to point out, I saw a question pop up here, and maybe you can get into that in your response, Olivia, about another issue. That question: what do you do? What's the challenge when elected officials are resistant to actionable change, or when you experience pushback? How do you keep momentum going?
Yeah, so I can kind of give an update about our criminal justice issue campaign, and probably talk a little bit about some of that pushback from elected officials or momentum as well. So I work a lot with our pretrial diversion team, and we one of the things we asked for in our first year was a live dashboard to show us who is in jail, how many folks are incarcerated in the current moment, like a live jail dashboard. What is their race, what is their gender, and what have they been charged with? And by monitoring that, we know that the county jail is at the capacity. We have reached capacity at Lancaster County Jail. We have over 700 people incarcerated in our jail here, and then actually our county has had to pay to incarcerate folks in other jails because we just don't have the space here. And so we also know that most folks who are incarcerated at our jail are struggling with housing, mental health specifically, or substance abuse issues, and really just don't have access to the resources that they need. you know, depending on what specific struggle they're dealing with. And so we have also learned due to the jail dashboard that a lot of people are being held for nonviolent charges. So the majority of folks who are being held in our jail pre-trial are being held on nonviolent charges. And what that means is that they are still presumed innocent. They haven't yet gone to trial. And so when we were doing our research on this issue, we were looking at a program called diversion. So for folks who don't know, we're looking at adult pretrial diversion. So this program specifically impacts people who are in the jail, but have not yet gone to trial. They are awaiting trial, and there are a bunch of different programs that can kind of help try to meet the needs of the people. So there is mental health diversion, there is drug diversion, there is veterans diversion. So really, you know, specific to the needs of the folks that are incarcerated. They get into these programs. Once you complete the required classes or whatever it might be, your charges are dropped. And so it helps divert, right? The name is diversion, divert people away from the criminal legal system. Where we are on this issue is we are trying to expand diversion. So we want more people to have access to those services, to those pretrial diversion services. And we are, you know, I wouldn't say we are struggling a little bit to get commitments from our county attorney on this issue. We did a bunch of research, and we've really realized that the decision kind of lands within the prosecutor's office, which is our county attorney here in Lancaster County. And we have been asking him to commit to expanding diversion in a variety of different ways. I would say, you know, what we do and what we'll do this year as the adult pretrial diversion team is we will look for strategies to really encourage him to do that. When we get together as a committee, we strategize on how to move our elected official, in this case, the county attorney, to consider expanding diversion. We at Justice in Action, we are a direct action organization. Each year we organize 1,000 or over 1,000 people to come out and you know, stand behind our solutions. So we will be looking at direct action techniques to engage our elected officials. So maybe in the coming months, you'll see Justice in Action do a vigil outside of the city county building and really spend some time thinking and praying about and for the people who are incarcerated in the jail, and thinking and praying about and for our elected officials to make decisions that we know will be beneficial to our whole community. I do think engaging in some of those direct action techniques that can help us keep the momentum going. And also just being in relationship with people who are affected by the problem. We try to make sure that people who are affected by this issue are on the front lines and are telling their stories, and making sure that we are spreading that message and those stories to everyone involved in Justice in Action.
I want to take just a minute, because I think that this is actually the most controversial of our issues, because I think it's often, from my perspective, one of the most misunderstood. What we have heard and seen, and Olivia, you are much closer to this research team than I am. But what we have seen and heard is stories of people who are being held in the jail because why? And I think that's the disconnect for a lot of, like, why are people being held in jail? We assume that it's because they are violent or because they need to be there for some reason. And there is like this part of us that might connect this word justice with, like, well, if you're in jail, you deserve to be there,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, is not constitutional. Like, that's not actually what we believe, innocence until proven guilty. But also what are the reasons that people are being held in jail and not able to get out? That doesn't make sense to a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. So, for example, some of our top charges that we often see on the jail dashboard are possession of a controlled substance, attempted possession of a controlled substance, failure to appear, trespassing. Those are the ones that we often see to the top, that are at the top of the chart when we look at the charges that people are held on. So, you know, those charges are not violent typically, right? And so what that usually means is that there is maybe an issue with substance abuse, or those people could use some resources regarding substance abuse, or maybe some help with mental health issues, which also tend to go hand in hand with some of those charges that we often see at the top. Now, regarding how people end up at our jail, I think it is important to note, especially for folks who are new to this issue, that there is a difference between prison and jail, right? So like Beth mentioned, when Justice in Action is working on a local level, so we are not even talking about our state or federal prisons, right? People get this confused, especially with what's been going on in the news here in Lincoln. So we are really talking about the jail, the Lancaster County Jail on West O. And I also think it's important to note that that is under the purview of our county board. And so we elect, people to our county board, and they manage the budget, and they have overview or like purview over the jail. Of course, there's a jail director, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so let's say that Beth were to get picked up for shoplifting. Somebody thinks Beth stole from a gas station. The police are called. Beth gets arrested. Beth goes down to the Lancaster County Jail on West O and is booked for those charges. She sees a judge. The judge says, "Beth, I see that you have been caught for stealing 3 other times. I'm going to set your bail at $10,000. Okay? You have to pay that to get out, or if you can't pay it, you stay in jail until your trial date." Beth can't afford to pay her bond to get out. And so Beth sits in the Lancaster County Jail at West O for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, until her trial date. And then at that trial, she's either, presumed innocent, or she's deemed innocent and she can leave, or she maybe gets a year of jail time, and maybe she's already served it, and so she gets out. It really just depends. It's case by case, but that is how it works. So when we think about who is sitting at our local jail, those are mostly, probably 75% of people there are awaiting trial, so have not been convicted of any crime. That is very, I think, confusing, or even sometimes a little bit appalling to some folks, because they don't realize it's not prison. When people then get charged with a crime, so Beth goes to trial, they say, yes, you're found guilty of stealing. You have to serve some time in our state prison. They might transfer Beth to a prison, and then she's no longer in our county jail. So most folks are awaiting trial, and a lot of folks are there because they cannot afford their bond. So when we talk about adult pretrial diversion, we are talking about diverting people after arrest, before trial, and trying to get them the resources they need before they end up in prison. Now, a lot of people might think, well, shouldn't people be in jail? When people get the chance to do diversion, they have to complete classes. They have to complete different programs. Sometimes there's drug testing. It really depends on the specifications of the program. And if they complete it, their charges are dropped. We know that when people go through these programs, their likelihood of reoffending significantly drops. So that in itself is awesome for our community, right? That means less crime, because people are getting access to the help and resources they need. And so I think it is really important that these diversion programs are extremely successful. That's why our criminal justice team picked this as the solution. When you go through the programs and get the resources you need, you are much less likely to commit crime in the future. And so luckily these programs have been around for a while, so we have the statistics. We know that they're really great. But our goal is to expand them, expand access to getting into these programs, or maybe even create a new diversion program that addresses a specific group of people who may be incarcerated.
Well, yeah, I'm impressed by just hearing these backstories and behind those preconceived notions that I have figured it out in my mind how things make sense. And I sense a lot of the deep knowledge and passion with both of you about these issues. I know we have a third issue, which is affordable housing. And but I do want to shift the conversation a little bit, and I'm really curious. kind of like on a personal level, about what leads you or motivates you in this line of work? What is your why behind what you're doing?
Yeah, I can go first. So before I was started as a lead organizer here, I was the associate pastor at Christ United Methodist Church, and I ran an outreach ministry near UNLZ's campus called Connection Point. And it was largely a food pantry. We were working on poverty alleviation programs, reaching out to immigrants and refugees in the community. And it was really good work, and the work continues with the folks who have followed me. But it was like quintessential mercy ministry, right? Helping one person at a time. And like Pastor Melody alluded to, as the pastor in that setting, I heard lots of individual stories. People shared their struggles with me, that and I got to learn about the causes of the root causes of why they were showing up in the food pantry, why they needed this help. And over time, one story became 10 stories, became 100 stories.
Mm.
And so many times, as the pastor and the person that they were coming to for help, there's nothing I could do, because the root causes of the issues, the things that brought them there, um, were part of these huge systems like our criminal legal system, like our housing and medical systems. And I started to feel really, really hopeless. This was around COVID time, like the last couple of years of my ministry there. So every barrier that folks faced pre-COVID just got that much higher when COVID hit and the world shut down. Um, and I really felt this discontent in my spirit, and this sense of defeat. Like, okay, I might have fed 100 people today, but there was 100 more lined up outside the door that we didn't have time to help. Um, and so what keeps me going in this work is that it gives me hope. It is something I can do to address those root causes of the suffering that the people I really cared about in that ministry were facing. Um, and it was hard for me to leave that ministry with people that I had deep relationships with, because I did, I loved my neighbor as myself. I was trying to live into that commandment. Um, but it's because I loved them that I had to go upstream. Like I said, I had to go upstream and figure out how to address the root causes of that suffering and change the systems that were just continuously keeping people down time after time. So for me, yeah, it's the relationships, it's care for my neighbors, and it's the fact that doing something, taking action, gives me hope.
Thank you so much. What about you, Olivia?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things in my life that have pointed me in the direction of justice. I think when I was growing up, my parents did a lot of service work, and I've always been kind of drawn to service and helping people who needed it. I think about a specific memory. When I was a grad student, I volunteered as a trip leader to take a bus of undergrad students on spring break to do volunteer work. And so, when I volunteered, I didn't really know the issue that I'd be working on, but I ended up riding a bus, from Illinois to Texas to work on an issue of prison justice. And I did not know anything about prisons, and I did not know much about what it looked like for someone to transition out of prison and back into society. But that's what we did. So for a week, we worked in Texas. We worked with people who were transitioning out of prison. We helped people learn how to use a cell phone for the first time and, hadn't been out of prison in 25 years. We helped people buy bus tickets. We worked at women's transitional homes. We did a lot of manual labor. We did a lot of sorting clothing. We did some painting, of course. So we did some landscaping. But one thing I'll never forget is we actually worked at a nonprofit, and it was kind of like a bed and breakfast where if your loved one was incarcerated and was going to be put to death, and you couldn't afford a hotel in that community because you didn't have enough money, you could stay at this home for free while your loved one was on death row. And we worked at that house, and we met people, and we heard their stories, and I just couldn't believe that something like that existed. And just the harms that the criminal justice and the criminal legal system has done to people and their families. And so when I came back from that trip, I joined an organization that was working on a bunch of different issues, but it was a local organization doing community organizing on local issues. And that I got hooked to really working in the local systems to try to change things. I think that's where we can have the largest impact. Our city and our county, I think that's where we can really dig in and have a huge impact. And I saw it work in the community that I was living and working in. And so I think what keeps me going is I love this work, but I also love teaching people that you can make a difference. It takes people, it takes power, it takes organization, but on a local level, like, we can do whatever we want, right? Like, we can make a change locally. And so I love kind of being the person to help people realize that. And I do think, like Beth said, it gives people hope to feel like we can have a change. And I think that part of that hope really comes from working on a local level. Like, this is where we live, this is where we work, this is where our families are, and we can be the people who decide what our community looks like. And so that's why I really love this work, and that's why I love that our focus is on the city and the county.
I want to thank you both so much for being with us and sharing some time with us today. And I've shared many times that I think that this is such important work, but also what I have loved about Justice in Action is an opportunity to meet colleagues and to work together with other faith communities. And also, I will never forget, and I think that this happened recently with the housing summit that you all did, but I will never forget going to the mental health summit and sitting at a table with people who had been mental health care providers in our community for decades. And that had never happened. They had never been in a room with other providers to find out what other providers are doing and what their challenges are. And I just thought, oh my gosh, like, the ability to bring people together, which is, so for anybody who's like, I just can't get on board, that's all we're doing. All we're doing is bringing people together.
Organizing. Yeah. Yeah.
in ways so that we can really truly share what's happening in our lives. And we're finding that there's power in that. So thank you both for continuing in this work, for putting up with people like me who have good hearts and sometimes very poor follow through. You all are amazing. And again, I would say everybody needs a Beth and Olivia in their life. That's just how that goes.
Thank you so much. And
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks for having us.
And thank you everyone for listening. I do want to point out a few things. That one, we have a link to Justice in Action website in a description of this episode, where you can learn more about the organization and the campaigns and how to get involved. If you like this conversation, like to hear more of that, please like and subscribe us. And if you want to leave us a review in wherever you listen to your podcasts, that helps us to be found by other people. And if you leave us comments or questions or something you would like to know more about, please comment and contact us. We like to read your reaction and involve them in further reflection. Thank you so much for being with us, and I look forward to our next conversation.
We'll see you next week. We have a conversation scheduled with Sharon Candle, who is the PCUSA regional liaison for the Horn of Africa. So we'll be heading out on the Sunrise Road and visiting the Eastern Horn of Africa. But we are so thankful for your participation today, and we'll see you next week.